There is no greater human sorrow than burying a child. The leading cause of death amongst young people in Canada is accident, an unexpected, evil twist of fate. The second leading cause of death amongst young people in Canada is death by one's own hand. Our children are choosing to take a path into eternal darkness because of a momentary loss of hope. Our children, our future, are committing suicide. This is Diane Biederman. Welcome to the many voices of mental illness. Today, we'll talk about suicide and involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility. We'll hear from a psychiatrist, a lawyer, a police officer, and a family support group educator, and what is involved in committing a loved one to a psychiatric facility. I believe that caring for someone with mental illness is exhausting. If I had a choice, I would rather be the one with the mental illness than care for someone. I met a beautiful woman, mother of 3. Her eldest child attempted suicide. I'm at Trellis at part of the family support program, and tonight's discussion is recovery, which is how families learn how to deal with members who have a mental illness. Tell me about your story.
My son is 19 years of age, and in October of this past year, he attempted suicide. A feeble attempt. He cut himself with a knife, but not enough to cause serious damage, but enough to scare. But he did say to me, "Do you want me to watch me kill myself?" And I said no, and I ran to get help, but he stopped me from getting out of my home and unplugged the phone from the wall, and I couldn't get out and couldn't call for help, and it was very alarming. He went and got a toaster, filled up the bathtub. I pretended to go along with him, so that in attempts that at one moment, I'm a very physically small person in comparison to my son. At one point, I thought, I'm going to get free and go. And I never thought at any moment he would ever hurt me or anything like that. But he didn't want me to leave, but I was trying to leave to get help. And he's been suffering from depression and severe anxiety for a number of years. He also has ADD, and he has just spiraled down into quite a depression, has been on medication for, I'd say about 2 or 3 years, tried. Nothing seems to have worked, and at this time, and my husband has a job where he travels a lot, and I was at home by myself with my son, and no one was there, and I felt very helpless to get help when this all happened. Anyway, I managed to get out and fake that I was going downstairs with him to find an electrical cord, and anyway, I got out of the house and ran to a neighbor and got help, and he ran away. The police came and he ran, and he ended up in the Homewood under the Mental Health Act, but that only lasted 72 hours, and he was out.
I'll ask you about that. You called the police, you told them what happened, and then did they apprehend him?
They apprehended him at a friend's house. I knew exactly where he would go. He has very few friends. A lot of his, he warned me, in the summer, he said he was planning to go off his meds and that things could get pretty dicey. That's how he had said it. And I didn't agree that he should go off of them, but, I mean, he's 19. I can't force him to take anything. So, anyway, he did go off of them. He weaned himself off of them, and his doctor knew that. And interesting enough, previous to this attempt, my husband and I had gone not only maybe 2 weeks before to talk to his doctor, who was excellent, by the way, to talk to him about not that he could divulge any information about our son, but to give him information that he may not be aware of. He uses pot to self-medicate, and was he aware of that? Was he aware that he, has great difficulty sleeping, that he wasn't eating, and just to give him a little bit more information to help him along when my son would go to see him. And anyway, he gave us an hour of his time and spoke to both of us. I have holes in my walls and smashed tile from when he has his frustrations. He never physically hurts anybody. It's more punching at things because he's frustrated with himself. And I think he knows a lot that he doesn't know how to help himself, and he refuses to go for help. He did go to a psychiatrist. It didn't go well. He has been on the medication. He has gone for counseling, but not stuck with it. So we're kind of at a standstill right now. I mean, everything's kind of like a little bit of smooth waters, but even being here, right now what happens is when my husband is away, I get very anxious because I am alone. And I used to be a very independent person, separate from my husband, and now I find myself, when's he coming back? When's he coming back? Because I'm afraid that something might happen again. So that's where it stands now. But I'm very open about my situation. But since then, I've come here to the group, and I've gone to CAD for support services. And I am seeing a counselor now. So I'm doing all the things I need to do to keep myself well, because if I'm not well, I'm no good too. And I have 2 other children. So and they actually, my middle son in particular is receiving counseling, which he chose to do, because it spreads as anybody knows, mental illness spreads through a family like nothing else.
Well, when somebody has a mental illness, everybody's life changes, and everybody loses something. There's a dream. For you, you've lost a dream, so I would assume you're also in a bit of mourning and grieving over the child that isn't the way you had hoped for him.
Interesting. I just had this conversation while I was at the Y today. I was having a conversation with somebody. I said, I feel like I've lost my son and that he won't be coming back, and the person that's in his place is not the person I gave birth to.
Close your eyes, have no fear. The monster's gone, he's on the run, and your mommy's here.
And that's very, very hard. As a mom, you just want to protect and save. And the hardest thing I have to say is that the hardest thing for me has been not to enable him, to make him responsible for his own actions. Like the other day, he said to me, if I have to work in a factory, I might as well kill myself. And I said to him very calmly, because the other person before, a couple of months ago, I would have said, oh no, you can't do that. And now I just choose not to get sucked into the black hole myself. And I say, you know what? That will be your choice. I know it sounds very harsh and very matter of fact, but I said, living is a choice, and you have a choice. And I would hope that you would choose to live your life to the fullest that you can live it. But if you choose to harm yourself, that will be your choice. So I feel like I'm trying to do everything I can as a parent, and personally for myself, I'm no good to my other children, I'm no good to my husband, I'm no good to my son who suffers the mental illness if I don't take charge of my own life. And not that it means I stop worrying, because I stay awake many nights and stuff, but I'm doing things to help myself along in the journey of this. And I wouldn't want to wish it on anybody. It's been the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, ever.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful boy. Beautiful, 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 beautiful boy.
I asked Dr. David Kozerginski, Chief of Psychiatry at William Osler in Brampton, to talk about youth suicide. What do you think, from your experience of talking to young people, is triggering what appears to me to be a greater incidence of young people even thinking about ending their life, which I might be wrong, I don't remember hearing this in the 60s and the 70s, But is something going on that we're having more young people talk about killing themselves?
Suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst adolescents and young adults following accidents. It is it's a severe tragedy, and for the most part, suicide is a preventable tragedy. Why are we seeing it more? I mean, I think for one, I think it's probably twofold. I mean, I think one aspect of it has to do with what we were speaking about before. I think people are a bit more open in talking about it. I think it's a bit more publicized. Media is more prevalent, and the internet, and so communication is more prevalent. So to some extent, I think we hear more about it. I think suicides have always existed. But I do think that there's something to what you're suggesting, that there may be a trend for this to be more common, and I think we could speculate as to why that might be. We live in a culture where core families are sometimes less close, where there's more. We see many young people who come from broken families, who are disengaged, disconnected from significant adults in their lives. We've seen a growing problem of substance abuse in youth that is probably much greater than it was decades earlier. Marijuana is now ubiquitous. It's everywhere, but it goes beyond just marijuana. Much harder street drugs are much more prevalent, and alcohol continues to be a problem, and a growing problem for many adolescents. So when you put together kind of disengagement from family, community, along with the growing problem of substance abuse, I think all of those become greater risk factors for depression, and depression is a great risk factor for suicide.
Suicide is final. The person considering suicide is not well. Healthy people do not kill themselves. I remember one of my doctors telling me that if you can just hang on just a little longer, the sun will come up, the darkness will lift. Live another day. Wait that extra hour. The fear and the anxiety will pass if you just hang on a little longer. I can't imagine what it must feel like to be afraid of one's child, parent, or spouse. There are times when a mental illness becomes so overwhelming that it's like a whirlwind out of control on a path of destruction. The last resort for help is the legal system. Today, we'll talk to Constable Mark Pettapiece, Robin-Lee Norris, a partner in the law firm of Miller Thompson, and Jacqueline Long, a social worker at Trellis in Guelph, about the role of police and the courts in mental health care, the legal rights of people with a mental illness, and the rights of loved ones and the community.
There is, first it's two streams. There's voluntary and involuntary. And a voluntary admittance to any kind of psychiatric facility requires someone to go and get assistance, usually from a physician through to a psychiatrist, to be assessed and to be admitted. And that is the simplest way and probably the least frequent way anyone ever ends up in a psychiatric facility. If a doctor can see that someone is that's reasonable to assume that if they continue in the path they're going to do harm to themselves or to someone else. And they get that information. Sometimes they get the information directly from observing the patient. They often go back and should go back to talk to friends and family. And they can make an involuntary referral. They can say, you need to go to an institution, and they can enlist help if the person chooses not to want to accept that diagnosis. So the three ways are really through a physician, through the police, or through a justice of a peace. But I do consider those all interrelated, because a physician can say to someone, you have to go, we are going to have you go and spend some time in a psychiatric facility, and there are rules about how long that is when it's involuntary and all those sorts of things. And they can enlist the assistance of the police to do that if someone isn't cooperating.
Constable Pettapiece, how do you fit in with that when someone calls the police?
Usually when they call the police, it's at a crisis situation where they've either done harm to themselves, harm to someone else, or there's the fear of harm. So we come in to protect the public and protect themselves included. So if we get a call on 911, our dispatchers will dispatch our units to attend. We assess the situation as we get there. If there's information the person's harmed themselves or is about to harm themselves, we would then apprehend them under the Mental Health Act and bring them before a psychiatrist. Usually with us, it's through the Emerge at the Guelph General Hospital to be assessed by the emergency room doctor, or we can bring them to Trellis if they're open.
Are police trained to handle people with mental illness? Is there special training for them?
Yeah, at the Ontario Police College, we do receive training when we initially start in our basic constable program. But as we go through the training through policing and experience that you get from your coach officer and other people on the service, you gather more, I'd call it life experience, through doing the calls.
Okay, Robin, now that we have the police at our home, now what?
Well, and this is always a struggle, and what you have to recognize as family members is that often what seems to be the last thing you'd ever want, which is seeing someone leave in the back of a police car, it's about safety, and I think that's really what Mark was referring to. Is it's everyone's safety, including the loved one, and so yes, they get taken away, they get processed through, and I think Guelph is very fortunate because we now have a dedicated part of our emergency facilities at the hospital where we have staff who are trained to recognize symptoms, to recognize crisis in mental health, and to look for appropriate ways to have that person looked after, that isn't just releasing them onto a street with no place to go. So they're processed, they go into a facility, they can be detained for a period of time, and that can be renewed. If the psychiatrist doesn't believe that it's safe for them or others for them to be released, those kinds of detentions can continue. What I didn't mention is besides the physician and the police, a family can go to a justice of the peace and swear out an affidavit and appear before the justice to get the justice of the peace to make an order that the person should be referred to a physician or psychiatrist to have them assessed. So there is another way to go. It's probably the least often used. It's the piece that sometimes I try and counsel families to use, hoping that we don't quite get to the absolute crisis, someone being put someplace farther along in some kind of crisis than they would be otherwise.
In Guelph, calls to police for assistance for someone with a mental illness occur about once a day. A significant number of calls require police intervention to take a family member away. I asked Constable Pettapiece to explain what happens when the police receive an emergency call.
Generally, when people get to a point where they're going to call the police, it's gotten to a point where they can't handle it anymore, whether that be the person themselves or family members. So if they've gotten to a point where they need to call the police, they'll call 911. Our communicators will take information from them pertaining to what kind of act the person's doing, whether they have weapons, what kind of safety concerns we have, whether they're in a home, whether they're wandering. All these sort of things will factor in our response. If our tactical rescue team is working, generally they're the first ones to respond. They receive more training on this sort of thing to take care of people. So if they get the call, they will go and attend to the address, and if they locate the subject, they'll make their own assessment, but it's also based on the information that's provided through the communicators as well as the person that called it in. And based on all that, we form reasonable grounds or a belief that this person needs to be assessed. We'll take them up to the hospital. If we don't feel they need to be assessed, we'll try to suggest things to the family, to the people, what maybe they can call some people to get some help. We'll call Trellis if we can to set up some sort of appointments for them. The interest we have is the safety of everyone, public safety being the person out in the street or that person that needs help. So there's really, these are guidelines. What I brought is our policy that dictates some response, but in the end they're guidelines. It's still going to be situational based on what we deal with. And if the person's violent, it will up our response. So we need to satisfy that there's a danger to that person or others and that they can't take care of themselves. And that could entitle they're not eating. their fridge is bare and they haven't eaten in weeks, and they physically can't take care of themselves. While they're not wanting to harm themselves with a physical injury, they're doing harm to themselves by doing that. So these are some of the factors that we consider, but every situation is different. There's no exact way to say or set one guideline saying, well, you have to cross this threshold. It all changes, because while we're there, someone may say something, I want to kill myself.
Who by fire, who by water, who in the sunshine, who in the nighttime, who by high or deep.
We're always looking to balance the rights of individuals and the rights of their family and the broader public. So Marx, when he talks about the police and what they can do and can't do, people forget that they are not the ones who are providing the mental health care. They are there to ensure that someone is safe and that the public is safe to the best of their ability. And they run straight into the rights of individuals. And I would say, and Jacqueline has heard me use this analogy probably more often than she'd like, but for me, I always think of public rights and individual rights. It's kind of like a pendulum on a clock. And if I had to describe Ontario and, in fact, Canada and the U.S. right now in terms of rights, the pendulum has swung so far to individual rights that the clock has almost fallen over. And the problem that creates, editorial comment, the problem that creates for families and friends is that their rights are really limited once you've got someone has reached the age of 18. The right to step in, even though you can see something coming, unless we get something like a community treatment order or some other mechanism, the ruling will always be in favor of the individual under the current system.
Age of majority plays a significant role in caring for people with mental illness. Should people with mental illness over the age of 18 have the right to make all their own decisions regarding their health care? First, the mother of the 19-year-old.
I'm extremely angry about that. But fortunately, our son gave his permission for us when he was at the Homewood to discuss, have his doctor discuss with us, which was very helpful. He allowed us after his visit in the Homewood. He allowed us to talk to his doctor and go with his doctor, and he allowed us to do that. So that was really good. But it angers me that he lives in my home. I am responsible maternally for his well-being and for his coping and all of that. I care for him. I help him along financially and all of that. And yet I'm out in the dark like it's not my business.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful boy. Beautiful, 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 beautiful boy.
What I would really like to see is that when someone has been diagnosed with a mental illness, that there be a different set of rules in terms of how information from physicians and the police can be shared with their major caregiver or their family. That's the piece that I think is the disconnect. It's not whether we arbitrarily choose 18 or 21 or 16 or any of those things. It has to do with people's capability, in my view.
You got to weigh the individual rights to the right of the person who's calling. And if he's living there and this person is going to be formed and isn't really of sound mind, then the doctor can talk to the parents if they choose to. We're going to be involved with the parents from the time they call. They're the complainant. They're the one calling us. So the information is there that, yes, we're taking them to the hospital. once we make that decision to take someone to the hospital, we're in a stasis game. We wait at the hospital till the doctor makes their determination. If the doctor determines this person needs to go to a psychiatric facility, we'll help facilitate that and getting them there. And once they're there, our involvement in them is over at that point. And then we can notify the parents that, yes, this person was taken to a psychiatric facility. They're usually up at the hospital anyway, so they'll know this information because they're the loved ones. You know, they're not there. It's not a criminal charge. It's to help this person out. So,
Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think, I really second what Robin has to say with regards to this. There is a section under the Mental Health Act, and I don't have the section number right offhand, but about risk. So if there is a risk, and risk being a safety piece to the family, information sharing will happen. So a physician can call the family and say, you know, this is the scenario. There's harm could be done to you. I need to release that information. So I think that's a really important piece, is risk trumps everything, right? So it's education around that for families, you know, and letting them know that. But I think, you know, really at the end of the day, again, it's weighing that individual versus, you know, society's piece, right? And I think as professionals, the three professions in this room, police, lawyer, and social worker, it's really that comes into play almost on a daily basis, right? You know, is it that individual, you know, piece versus that societal piece? And that's really what we need to look at. You know, are we really serving the person with the mental health issue better by keeping that information back, or is it better service to them to, you know, include a care team? And that's really challenging, because a lot of times when somebody's ill, they can't make that clear decision on their own, because they can't, I don't like this analogy, but kind of see the forest through the trees at that time, right? Because their neurotransmitters are functioning at the capacity they should be. So I think those pieces are something that we need to look at.
There are some diversionary courts that exist that are just trial courts that are extraordinary in what I think they can do to decriminalize mental illness when it's resulted in actions where there could be a criminal charge laid or, in fact, a conviction. You know, the looking at different ways to move people around and to look at solutions that are not just jail.
Jacqueline Long.
The way our Mental Health Act is written up right now is really the bottom needs to fall out before people get help, right? We have to get to a place of they're a danger to themselves or others. And I really would like to see it not get to that severity level, right? I think that's really important in the treatment process. I think it's really important in the dignity of the person suffering from the mental health issue. So if there could be something around that protection, right, of getting services before the bottom falls out would be amazing. And I think a big piece of that is that family, you know, the family input, the caregiver input, and having that information sharing. Really, at the end of the day, when you're ill, your loved one knows you better than anybody else. And if they can provide and be able to, you know, share information and really have that team community approach to getting the person services they need.
The moment that we have to call the police is the moment that the mental health care system has failed. When the police come to the house and make the assessment that this person needs to be taken to the hospital, they have to stay at that hospital, perhaps for several days, until a psychiatric bed becomes available. The parents want to be with their child or elder parent. How many days of work will be lost? And if you go to work, how focused will you be? Will you be working or just at work? Who will care for other family members? Mental illness has been attributed to be the cause of a loss of $51 billion in productivity every year. Maybe the financial cost to society will be the wake-up call. For more information in Ontario about access to mental health care, contact Connex Ontario at connexontario.ca. Help is available 24 hours a day in 140 languages. This is Diane Biederman. going to see the grandchildren. Thank you for joining me for the many voices of mental illness.